This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a run through the markets. October's proving to be a pretty decent month for the indices over at the JSE. Top 40 were there, for example, up by nearly 6% in the last 3 weeks. Only Egypt's EGX 30 is actually marginally ahead by around 20 basis points. Nigeria's all share is about 4% higher. In contrast, Kenya's equity market has had a torrid run in October, down by 3.8%. Sibanye-Stillwater, the JSE closed about 2.5% higher with large trading volumes. Over 9 million shares there changing hands, but not quite close to its 15-day moving average. The Platinum major share is about 9% lower so far in 2021. Total and PZ Cussons closed about 6 and 9% higher in Nigeria. The former share price has gone up by nearly 60% so far in the year. Here's what's coming up tonight. The third Turkey-Africa Economic and Business Forum wraps up in Istanbul. South Africa is in talks with wealthy nations in order to fund its shift away from coal power. And we'll explore how the real estate sector in Zimbabwe is adapting to new marketing models in order to navigate its way through this pandemic-induced slowdown. Our starting point tonight is actually outside the continent. The third Turkey-Africa Economic and Business Forum has wrapped up in Istanbul this Friday. Many high-level officials and business leaders from Turkey and the continent attended the meetings. Turkey's president stressed the importance of strengthening ties between Turkey and economies here in Africa in his closing speech. CGTN's Michal Bardavid has the details.
The two-day Turkey-Africa Economic Business Forum attracted around 3,000 business people and included representatives of 45 African countries. One of the main aims of the forum was to raise awareness regarding investment opportunities both in Africa and in Turkey. Participants were also encouraged to explore potential business partnerships in trade, technology and logistics. In his closing speech of the event, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan stressed that Turkish investors have great trade interests in Africa.
Turkish companies have materialized more than 1,150 projects worth over $70 billion. Turkey's investments across the African continent have currently surpassed $6 billion.
The Commissioner for Trade and Industry of the Africa Union Commission stated that there were many sectors for development between Turkey and Africa.
These range from banking, technology, including transforming to a green economy, manufacturing, agro-processing, transport, shipping, logistics, health, education, construction, and among several others, tourism, including medical tourism.
Sustainable health partnerships in post-COVID times were also among topics discussed during the forum. Erdogan stated that Turkey had offered medical aid to 44 African countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. On the second day of the forum, sessions focused on women leadership, trade financing in Africa, and banking relations with Turkey. The forum concluded with the Turkey-Africa Business Award ceremony. Michal Bardavid, CGTN, Istanbul.
On to South Africa. Eskom is looking for cheap long-term funding in order to move away from coal-fired power. The firm says it's had fruitful discussions with Western climate envoys. Climate envoys from the UK, the US, Germany, France visited South Africa several weeks ago, and they held talks about ways to support the country's transition to less polluting sources. South Africa is the world's 12th largest carbon emitter. It said at the time that it needed major financial support from wealthy nations in order to accelerate its shift away from coal, and it says it wanted an irrevocable agreement that could be signed at the COP26 climate summit next month. Eskom supplies more than 90% of the power used in Africa's most industrialized nation. Most of that comes through burning coal at its 15 coal-fired power stations. All right, then let's explore the details of how this transition might work with Thabo Sibeko, a program officer at the anti-coal campaign at Earthlife. Thank you for your time this evening. So Eskom says they need about $27 billion. That's roughly 400 billion rand in order to phase out its coal power plants. But do we have any more concrete details on how that phase out would happen and what generation sources would replace coal?
Yes, good evening. Good evening to your viewers as well. Yeah, I think a just transition to a low carbon development is a viable option as a move that countries, even the European countries, has actually adopted in order to replace coal to a much better viable options to generate energy in South Africa as well as other countries. So renewable energy is one of reliable technology which is actually adopted by so many countries, and South Africa is one of the countries that is actually has to move away from coal. I think the time has come now that Eskom should actually begin to move away from this kind of way of generating energy to a much more sustainable way, which will be able to save people's health as well as the environment. So renewable energy sources such as your solar panels, solar PV, hydro, and many others which are more sustainable is actually most recommended to replace coal.
But who should pay for that transition? Because we've heard promises in Paris when the Paris Climate Agreement was agreed to that, yes, we're going to provide at least $100 billion in funding from these same Western countries a year by 2020. That money is clearly not materialized. So can South Africa make that transition purely by domestic capital?
Yeah, I think South Africa is actually, by the willingness of the decision makers, government, I think it's very, very much possible. I mean, if you look at the how Eskom currently is actually generating an energy, and just a few years ago, Eskom has actually asked its consumers to actually pay more for electricity, which that on its own, it tells you that Eskom is actually able to generate enough revenue to be able to, implement a just transition to low carbon development. But also our government is actually has got a major role to play in funding the just transition to a low carbon development. Like recently now, they are now talking about the Just Transition Fund, which is a fund that will actually allow the just transition to take its course in a more comfortable manner, particularly also just to also accommodate those that are willing to actually move away from the current way of generating energy or electricity by using coal. So by willingness of our government and the politicians, I think it's very, very much possible, and resources and funds would actually be made available to fund that.
Just a quick follow-up on that, because Eskom has raised its tariff and it's currently struggling to essentially stay on top of that massive amount of debt that it has. As part of that transition, would it be acceptable to you for South African taxpayers to essentially bail out Eskom, to take on some of that debt service in order to give it the fiscal room it needs to invest in cleaner sources of power?
I don't think it will be fair for South Africans to actually, bail out Eskom at the moment, up until it's actually clear on their side that, the resources which actually were lost during, as the Eskom was functioning or is functioning.
You're referring to the looting that was taking place under the Guptas?
Yeah, I don't think for South Africans it's pretty much fair to bail out Eskom at the moment. I think the resources which were lost due to corruption and all that should actually be brought back first, and a decision moving forward could be taken from there. But without those resources coming back, I don't think it's very, very much fair to say South Africans must actually bail out Eskom at the moment, because even currently, Eskom is actually planning and is actually implementing the so-called unbundling, and it's still not clear. The public is not aware. People, ordinary, people on the street, they are not aware that this is actually happening. So I don't think it's fair to go back to them and say, because Eskom is actually currently undergoing this difficult moment, ordinary citizens should actually be bailing out Eskom. And if you look at also the amount of money that people are paying due to tariff hikes, I could say that already they are already, doing that, even though they are not aware. But, to say that there has to be a separate process which, people are actually following to bail Eskom, I don't think it's actually fair, for ordinary citizens.
Okay, one last question for you. We're getting closer and closer to COP26. From your perspective, what are the specific goals that South Africa should get when it walks onto the negotiating table at COP26, particularly in terms of funding, but also defining what acceptable emission offset should be?
Yeah, I think South Africa is one country that is actually good in terms of policy making and policy formulation. I think what I would like to see, something that is we are all, looking for as an outcome from the COP26 is that more action should be taken. Those implementation of the policies which are in place. Currently, South Africa has got a national determined contribution. We've got an integrated resource plan, and we've got also an energy plan in South Africa. And very little of those documents or policies are implemented. So what we are hoping for is that from the COP26, an acceleration of the just transition to low carbon development should actually take place at the moment, because very little is actually happening despite the adverse effect of climate change that we already starting to see taking place in the neighborhood countries as well as South Africa. So we want acceleration of the just transition to take place out of the COP26. South Africa should be forced to actually begin to move away from the current system and the current ways of generating electricity to a much more better and a viable option and sustainable that will accommodate everyone and that will be able to also save the environment.
Okay, we'll leave it there for the time being. Tambo Sibeko, Program Officer, Anti-Coal Campaign at EarthLife. Now, we're still in South Africa. The country is pinning its hopes on that transition, in part on green hydrogen. The idea here is that it might lift economic growth and reduce unemployment at the same time. Now, according to a feasibility study, green hydrogen could add up to $9 billion to South Africa's GDP by 2050. That study was completed in partnership with the private sector companies, including Anglo-American Platinum, as part of South Africa's National Hydrogen Society roadmap. The aim is to bring various hydrogen applications together to form a hydrogen valley, if you will. Here's Sumitra Naidu with that report.
South Africa's energy transition will see a move away from coal, which will cause thousands of job losses. But the country is concentrating its efforts on developing the green economy. Green hydrogen could be a game changer.
Now, South Africa's reliance upon coal has to change. It's about 85% of the energy supply. Could we at least move our transport addiction, which is mainly to imported petrol and diesel, to a hydrogen cell as a sort of battery form that would allow us transport, particularly on buses and trucks? That would be the pilot. And if Sasol can make that happen, that would be on the basis of green hydrogen. The intense energy needed to create the hydrogen would come from the sun. And into the hydrogen cell itself would go our platinum metals group of rhodium and palladium and platinum.
The feasibility study identifies 9 green hydrogen projects in the mobility, industrial and construction sectors.
Green hydrogen, the electrolyzers produce green hydrogen as well as the cleaner fuel cell trucks. And we were looking at between 14,000 to 30,000 jobs per annum. Tax revenue, we were looking at 3.3 to 8.8 billion US dollars of GDP growth between now and 2050. That's critical because, there's capex required for the electrolyzers that we would put in place to generate green hydrogen, I think between 3 and 6 billion US dollars.
Getting the regulatory environment right is a first priority for South Africa's government.
The small players like the SMEs that will serve as part of the value chains, we're going to put in place a PMO to assist them with ensuring that they can actually bring technologies into the market, but also reduce the legislative and administrative barriers for the work. So I think this PMO is expected to get up and running before the end of the current financial year for government.
A special economic zone in the Northern Cape will be the first location to drive this new sector.
The Northern Cape has the best irradiation in South Africa. You have infrastructure, existing SEZ infrastructure that is in place that is looking to be upgraded to ensure that we can provide green hydrogen and then ship it, put it on ships either as green ammonia and take it to other parts of the world that don't have the great resources that we have.
Grants and concessional funding is expected to drive the initial development stages for green hydrogen production. Some big corporations have already invested to get the ball rolling. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The 4-year-old South African stock market, A2X, backed by the billionaire Patrice Motsepe's African Rainbow Capital Investments, expects to break even by 2023. That comes as its trading in the secondary listings that it offers starts to take off. Angela Coppola has the details.
The exchange's 12 top 40 stocks listed and 57 listings, including brands like Prosus and Investec PLC, the latest to get a secondary listing. The focus has shifted to the brokers.
About 2 years ago, we made a decision to launch our own post-trade system. And this actually came into play earlier this year, and that has created a big unlock in terms of activity on A2X. So we've seen a couple of our brokers that have been working with us suddenly, they're totally automated, they can trade across markets, they can get the best price for their clients, and they just, as I said, they come in, they trade away, and we've seen as a result of that, I think August was a record month for us, and September, just to give you a sense, was 5 times that.
However, not everyone is convinced that the exchange is needed.
I'm still trying to work out what benefit they do bring to the wholesale space, to the people whom they are servicing. Is it a cost factor? I'm not sure, because I don't see all that much trade taking place on the JSE. I think our volumes are actually coming down, and today trading in the wholesale space is very, very, very cheap.
The exchange has big plans for the next 2 years.
We're looking at bringing new order types to South Africa, order types that happen in Europe and are familiar in Europe, but we don't have in South Africa, so we're looking to roll out a few of those. In addition, we obviously amended our license to include inward listings some time ago, so we are focusing on bringing a new product to South Africa.
There are still some questions about why locally listed companies would want a secondary local listing.
What makes these companies want a secondary listing? I can understand a secondary listing in London, secondary listing Australia, or Europe or America. Those have paid handsomely for a lot of other businesses, but I'm not too sure whether it's aligned to the derivative markets and alternative markets. There may be a point there.
Brady says they have a compelling value proposition.
Our fees, exchange fees, are literally half those of the standard rates. And that in itself attracts additional players who are very cost sensitive. So that's the one thing. The second thing is, as you start reducing friction costs, you attract this new liquidity and your bid-offer spreads start to narrow. So when you come to buy or sell a share, you can actually generally buy it in A2X at a better price.
This exchange appears to have hit critical mass, and it's likely to go from strength to strength going forward. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Sandton, South Africa.
All right, then on to some corporate headlines. The Budget Monitoring Forum in Mozambique has called on Credit Suisse to fully cancel debt estimated at $2 billion. Now, the debt is linked to a scandal involving the bank, and it's 10 times more than it has offered to write off. The Swiss lender helped to arrange nearly about $1 billion in bonds, plus a syndicated loan between 2013 and 2016, ostensibly to fund a tuna fishing project. US and British authorities fined the bank a total of $475 million to resolve bribery and fraud charges relating to that particular deal. Commodities trading giant Glencore allegedly paid bribes to secure maritime fuel supply contracts in Brazil in 2010 and 2011. The country's year-long car wash probe into payoffs to secure business with the state-controlled energy company Petroleo Brasileiro, or Petrobras as it's more commonly known, revealed these underhand dealings. The bribes were paid to Petrobras traders by intermediaries and the former Chemoil trader Emilio Heredia, who pleaded guilty to conspiring to manipulate the fuel oil market in a separate case in the United States back in March. Qantas says it will be speeding up plans to restart flights to many destinations and upsize some planes amid massive demand. for international flying as quarantine restrictions finally ease for Australian citizens. For 4 of the last 5 weeks, the airline's international sales have been stronger than domestic ones for the first time since the pandemic began. And finally, Asterix and the Griffin. That's the latest edition of the famous French comic series, Asterix and Obelix, went on sale on Thursday. The late original creators, René Goscinny and Albert Uderzo, have been replaced by Johnny Ferris and Didier Conrad, who are on their 5th edition now. Asterix, the mustachioed hero who's been entertaining readers apparently with his magic potion exploits alongside Obelix since 1959, has sold over 370 million copies worldwide. That's a run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Zimbabwe saves $300 million in its import bill following a bumper harvest. And the digital payment firm Cellulent is linking over 120 banks and 40 mobile operators across the continent. We'll speak to the CEO about the strategy next. There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference. Welcome back to the program. Now, after a series of successive droughts that have compromised food security in the past years, Zimbabwe's fortunes are finally turning around. The country has recorded a good harvest in the 2020-2021 season. These developments, in fact, have allowed the country to cut its import bill by $300 million. Many millers now are able to actually meet local demand. Nokutule Shabalala has that story.
Zimbabwe's maize reserves are advancing towards a projected 2.8 million tons following a good harvest. Millers of maize and other grains who once felt the pinch of failing to meet local demand due to droughts are now getting back on their feet.
We can plan beyond 12 months. Previously, we used to have one to 2 months cover. And that has been very difficult in terms of planning, in terms of committing to customers and ensuring that the market is well provided for. But also equally, in terms of labor, we were unable to guarantee tenure or employment beyond the cover that we had.
More grain deliveries are being recorded across the country compared to previous farming seasons. But Zimbabwe's Grain Marketing Board says farmers need to be financially and technically supported to contribute to the nation food basket.
Next year, we are expecting, all things being equal, 3.6 million metric tons of maize, according to our projections. And also to ensure that we get funding on time and pay our farmers on time, makes the farmers happy and they deliver to GMB. Give them a good price, farmers are ready to grow and improve on production.
The millers have felt the impact of climate change, and with the help from government, they need to adopt climate-smart agriculture for a greater grain yield.
We are not spared as Zimbabwe by this scourge of climate change effects and variability. So we need to adapt lest we die, hence our thrust and ploy to climate-proof agriculture through irrigation, rehabilitation and development.
To support the commercial grain farmers, government has targeted 1.5 million households this year. They are expected to plant 280,000 hectares of maize under a conservation agriculture scheme. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
The Pan-African payment gateway firm Cellulant has linked up over 120 banks and 40 mobile operators across the continent. Effectively, that gives the company a near unparalleled network across the continent. The integrated payments platform caters to both offline and online solutions, supporting businesses of all sizes. Earlier in the month, Akshay Grover was confirmed as chief executive after transitioning from the position by the co-founder and then group CEO Ken Njoroge back in January. All right, then, so let's explore where exactly the company is going with Akshay at the helm. Remember, before this, he was CFO of the firm. He joins us now live on the program. Akshay, good to have you on Global Business tonight. So let's start with a broad picture here. A lot of African countries have been weakening ever since the pandemic landed on African shores. You're essentially smack in the middle of the payments business. How are you handling the FX risk?
Well, I think COVID has impacted a lot of industries, and I think all of us have borne some of that impact. But I think long term, what COVID has been able to do is, if anything, add fillip to the process of digitization of payments. And I think that people are adopting a lot more digital payments today than they were perhaps 18 or 24 months ago. And I feel that this is something that's overall beneficial to the entire industry, not just in Kenya, but across the continent.
Walk us through your main transaction corridors and how transaction volumes and charges essentially changed, if they changed at all, during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, at our business, we track two things. We track number of transactions, and we typically track gross payment value, which is the aggregate value of the payments that have gone through. Both things candidly have grown over the last 24 months. What we are seeing is actually, we felt like some of this, maybe there would be reversals once things had stabilized from a COVID standpoint. But actually, we continue to see growth month on month, simply because I think, let's call it, habits have changed permanently for a lot of people. And so we actually continue to see growth across our business, across the several countries that we operate in.
What sort of numbers can you share on that? I mean, I know you're not a publicly traded company, so you're somewhat limited in that sense, but give us some numbers here. What sort of transaction volumes are we talking about?
Yeah, well, we are right now processing about 18 million transactions every month with a payment value of close to $1 billion US.
That's a pretty decent number. And that's growing on it's a single digit growth that we're seeing, or double digit growth?
It would be hard for me to comment on that. We are a private company, as you know, and a lot of information is held back, but I would say a healthy growth rate.
Okay, fair enough. When it comes to the business of continental payments, because the Afrexim Bank has flagged this repeatedly, most of our continental trade happens essentially in another currency. It usually tends to be in the US dollar, right? And I guess for most people who are watching this, they'll ask, why is it so difficult, for example, for a Kenyan trader to accept payment in the Naira, or for a trader in Nigeria to accept payment in the Kenyan shilling? Why is payment in local currency so difficult?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And by the way, this is one of the fundamental things that Cellulant as a mission is trying to solve. Today, we accept payment in several currencies across our footprint. But if I have to identify the problem, it's different things for different countries. There are countries where there is regulation around foreign exchange transactions and restrictions around what kind of incoming, outgoing transactions can actually happen. So that's one big reason. Second reason is, more often than not, is interconnectivity of the financial system just within, I would say, Africa, and cross-border within Africa. So the question is, that connectivity is something that needs to significantly be enhanced. And we are working with our financial partners, banks, financial institutions, to actually make that happen, make that process seamless. And I think the third thing is that very often the cost of the transaction tends to be high. And the reason for this is liquidity of that particular currency. Now, the US dollar has a lot of liquidity globally. It may not be comparable to, say, liquidity of a particular currency in Africa.
All right. One last question for you. And again, I know we're getting into the whole public versus private dictum, but walk us through your thinking at board level around taking the firm public, because we've seen over the trend over the last 2-3 years has been to see a lot of money coming into the fintech space. Paystack with Stripe, for example, $200 million going into that. You've seen Nigeria's fintech ecosystem has just absolutely blossomed. Sendwave here in Kenya has also gotten a fair bit of money. In that sort of environment, fintechs like yours are the future. But what are the pros and cons as you see it of going public or remaining private?
I think for businesses like ours that are high growth, but still to attain, let's call it a mature level of profitability, I think it's perhaps one shade better to remain private for some time. And the reason for that is that we are building a business which a lot of financial institutions have built over 100 years. And we're trying to achieve, I wouldn't say the same scale, but a very similar scale in 5 years, in 10 years, right? And what that means is that as a business, we need to invest ahead of the curve, invest to grow the business and not to solve for profitability in the next 5 months or 6 months. Yeah. And when you do that, it's perhaps better to be private, because I feel that public markets, I wouldn't say in the United States, and in the United States, people are a little more acceptable of that, but in a lot of stock exchanges across the world and a lot of investor classes actually like profitable businesses or cash flow generating businesses. And we are not that investment class yet. And so I think it also then imposes this artificial pressure of quarterly performance, which sometimes, you always have to, let's call it, compromise the short term to achieve the long term. And I feel that we are a long term business. So I think it's important for us to remain private to some extent.
And you also have a lot more options for raising capital now, don't you? Because you can, if you need to raise, go into the market, raise $60 million, $50 million, whatever the ticket number is, you can certainly do that on private markets vis-a-vis, and you don't necessarily have to go through the public route.
Exactly. And I think that capital is available, that capital, not just in Africa, but across a lot of developed markets who are looking at Africa as a strong investment destination.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Akshay Grover, Chief Executive Officer at Cellulant. Thank you very much for your time. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. Finance ministers from the Pacific Rim grouping Apec agree to step up global vaccine production. If you like your thrills, you're going to enjoy this. Dubai's inaugurated the world's largest and highest Ferris wheel.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Ethiopia's Air Force has launched a fifth airstrike on the rebel-held city of Mekele. The air raids targeted sites that are believed to be of strategic military importance. Also, the Russian President Vladimir Putin says that the private security firm Wagner does not represent the interests of the Russian state. His comments come on the back of ongoing reports that Mali is in talks with that private security firm to hire mercenaries. It's a move that France has warned against, saying that the hiring of these mercenaries would effectively isolate the country. Over in Guinea, coup leaders have named their first lineup of government ministers. The positions that have been named for so far include Defence, Security, Environment and Secretary General of the government. The officials given the posts include a former general and 3 other figures who had held positions under the ousted president, Alpha Condé. And finally, Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of a Nigerian separatist group, the Indigenous People of Biafra, has pleaded not guilty to charges of treason and terrorism. The charges were leveled against him by the federal government. Kanu's trial was held amid heavy security and protests. That's a run through your headlines. On to news from around the world now. Finance ministers from the Pacific Rim grouping Apec have agreed to step up global vaccine production efforts in a virtual meeting on Friday. Talks among the 21 member economies, which include China, the US and Japan, come as the pandemic continues to hinder a global recovery. On Poland reports from Auckland.
Yes, a short time ago, finance ministers from APEC's 21 member economies wrapped up a 3-hour virtual meeting in which they met to discuss the policy actions needed to combat and respond and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as tackling things like climate change, supporting inclusive and sustainable growth and improving the well-being of the people across the APEC economies. Now, the meeting was chaired by New Zealand's Finance Minister Grant Robertson, who says that we continue to battle the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and that the pain that it has brought to our people, our economies and our healthcare systems cannot be downplayed. Since the pandemic began, many economies have recovered much of the lost output, and real GDP is expected to grow across the region by more than 6% in 2021. But Mr. Robertson says that the recovery is far from complete because APEC economies face plenty of headwinds, including a rapid rise in public debt and demands for new spending. The downside risks for economic recovery also include the spread of new variants of COVID-19, as well as economic challenges like the ongoing supply chain disruption and increased inflation, which has emerged in recent months.
Now, as the COVID-19 Delta variant that ripped through the United States starts to wane off, the country is about to open its borders to unrestricted travel for millions of people around the world. And it cannot happen too soon for those who've been cut off from their loved ones for nearly 2 years now. And businesses that haven't been bankrupted are now desperate to resume cross-border trade. Here's Owen Fairclough with this report from Washington.
Craftsman Juan Valencia reunited with his wife and daughters in Chile. I'm so happy. I haven't seen them for a year and 10 months. These girls have grown up and now they're different. People like Juan have been allowed to return to Chile from the US after authorities in Santiago lifted COVID-19 travel restrictions. Now it's Washington's turn to do the same as the Delta variant that sent cases rocketing this summer is brought under control. From November the 8th, the US will lift restrictions for travellers from 33 countries, including China, as well as neighbouring Canada and Mexico, provided travellers have proof of full vaccination. For the Biden administration, this is tantamount to the kind of controversial vaccine passport that Canada's government is rolling out. And among those countries for whom restrictions into the US are being lifted, there are wildly differing rates of full vaccination. For example, in Canada, it's more than 70%, but in India, it's less than half that. The White House says its focus is purely on people who are fully vaccinated, and that means for those who've had only a single dose of a 2-dose vaccine, they're excluded. For this San Diego perfume store owner, the resumption of mostly unrestricted free movement across the US-Mexico border after 18 months is a financial lifeline.
Before closing, I have the lot I can say I like doing the more than 150,000 in a month minimum. So now I have 80,000, like 50%. And I hope now maybe when it's open, maybe I have more than 150.
The city's mayor is also counting on a restoration of trade.
The San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce has identified hundreds of businesses that have closed, they believe, directly as a result of the travel restrictions, and that's measured in millions of dollars, and that's in one neighborhood.
But for the unvaccinated, the US remains off limits for now, except for returning American citizens. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
On to Beijing now. Beijing Universal Studios has drawn in crowds since its official opening in September. The multi-billion-dollar amusement park is replete with quite a bit of interesting tech. Our reporter, Wang Siwen, looks into the 5G tech that's being used to improve visitors' experience.
Within a total of 4 square kilometers, full 5G coverage at the Universal Studios in Beijing. The 4G and 5G networks can support tens of thousands of users at the same time. With extensive indoor digital systems and macro cells, mobile phone networks that further boost high-powered cell sites.
In the park, there are many high-end user groups. From our user traffic data, 5G offload ratio has reached almost 50%. The number of 5G users and 5G traffic has reached a very high level. We can meet our users' requirements and guarantee meeting the users' needs during peak time.
Live streaming, playing video games, chatting online, or just browsing TikTok. You could find yourself doing any of those while waiting for your turn at Harry Potter's Wizarding World. Just some of the 37 rides where the average waiting time could be at least 30 minutes. But the 5G network in the park can fully satisfy 4K high-definition video and guarantee a rate of 300 to 500 megabytes per second or even higher.
I use the app to check the real-time waiting time and traffic flow. The waiting time shown on a screen is consistent with the actual waiting time. It's not like it will show 10 minutes on the screen, and when I get there, it turns out to be 20 minutes.
And the wireless communication base stations support all of these.
Well, you may never notice or be able to spot. Those boxes are actually 5G wireless communication base stations that guarantee the communication services of the whole park. And there are 36 such boxes in the park.
As a pilot platform for 5G infrastructure, Universal Beijing Resort has been a pioneer in 5G network coverage, ensuring its visitors get the best experience of the latest tourist attraction. Wang Siwen, CGTN, Beijing.
From recon to research, technology is transforming wildlife conservation in China in drastic ways. But what has changed for those who are actually working in the industry, and what impact might that have on species? CGTN's Nicole Eng reports.
They may be China's most beloved animal, but they're also notoriously lazy. The chances of coming across panda tracks in the wild has always been low. Those tracking and monitoring them can spend days, if not weeks, at the job.
We have to walk long distances into the forest up the mountain. Cars can't reach those places, so we just walk.
Rangers used to also walk to investigate fire hazards and illegal activity. But drones now do a lot of this work. And gone are the days of logging GPS coordinates. New apps help feed rangers' findings straight into a database.
On the phone, you can see how far we patrolled every week and every month, as well as which areas. And the control center can see where we are and what animals we found, because we can upload this information in real time.
But new technology has done more than bring about changes for rangers and their work. It's also giving researchers a clearer picture of the overall conservation story.
This was the theme of an event by Huawei this week. The company brought together experts to ask how technology has transformed their industry. Ahimsa Kamposa says remembers when he had to go into the field himself.
I began working with maps when we didn't have much kind of remote sensing, or we didn't use satellites. So I was a map maker back in the late 90s.
But he can spend less time gathering data now and more time on what he calls the bigger picture science.
We can collect better information, much bigger volume that we can manage, we can store, we can transmit, we can process, and we can analyze to draw conclusions.
Processing that information key to protection. So is finding out how to use the success of one species to help others. Nicole Ng, CGTN.
On to Japan now. Nearly a third of the population of the island state is over 65. Rising concerns about the country's labour shortage has now inspired quite a few tech firms like NTT Data to develop an unmanned retail register system. And that system is already being applied in convenience stores across Japan. Phoebe Amoroso has that story from Tokyo on What's Hot tonight.
Inside the headquarters of one of Japan's largest IT companies is a very different kind of convenience store. There's no cash register and no staff.
Recently, for retailers, the shortage of labour is a very serious problem. By establishing stores with no need for a cash register, we can help them with this system.
Japan has a steeply ageing population. Nearly 29% is aged 65 or older. This has left employers struggling to find workers. The population is set to decline roughly 30% of the 2015 level by 2065. At this convenience store, a member of staff only has to visit once a day in order to restock the shelves.
I've downloaded the Catch and Go application, I've registered my credit card information, and with just this QR code, I'm ready to go shopping.
The store is a trial project by NTT Data and supermarket chain Daiei, supported by Chinese unmanned store technology provider Cloudpick. A system of cameras and weight sensors monitors what items customers pick up and tracks if they decide to put something back. All customers have to do to pay is to simply walk out the gate. The money is charged to their credit card through the app. With no staff and only 10 people allowed at one time, the store has an additional benefit in the COVID-19 pandemic. There is growing demand for contactless shopping. The app also notifies customers with discounts on items that are approaching expiry, with the aim to reduce food loss. The shopping system developer has already equipped stores across Asia and Europe with its technology, and it's hoping to expand to other retailers across Japan.
Offline retailers are lagging behind in digitalisation, and issues that are typical in developed countries, such as the declining birth rates and high labour costs, are persistent problems. So we provide solutions in the retail field to tackle these, and we want to make further contributions to digital transformation.
As Japan's population continues to decline, technology will need to increasingly fill the gap, and staffless stores might become the norm. Phoebe Amoroso, CGTN, Tokyo.
One story for the thrill seekers among us. Dubai's are officially rolled out the world's largest and highest Ferris wheel, as the city is looking to reinforce its status as a tourism hub. The observation wheel was officially opened to the public barely 24 hours ago with a fairly lavish drone and fireworks show. It's located on the Blue Waters Island. It's called Dubai Eye. It's known as Ain Dubai in Arabic. It's 250 meters tall. It can take about 1,700 visitors on one rotation. From start to finish, you're looking at about 30 minutes. It's the latest attraction to open in the region's tourism and business hub after the Waxwork Museum, Madame Tussauds, opened earlier this week. Dubai is hoping to attract millions to the Expo 2020 World Fair. That actually opened in October after a year-long delay due to the coronavirus pandemic.
It's the largest Ferris wheel, so pretty excited to be here and to be part of the history.
Yeah, currently it's the sunset time and we're very excited. It's going to be fireworks, it's going to be crazy, and it's going to be a history made. It's like one of the largest Ferris wheel that we're going to see, and it's going to be amazing.
The biggest Ferris wheel in the world. It's the first day, it's the grand opening, and we are lucky to be at the same place.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices. So at today's levels, just north of $85 a barrel, Brent crude futures have gone up by about 7.3% so far in October. That's far better than the monthly gains we've seen from June to date, except for September. September was quite the outlier. Oil prices went up by over 10% then. Kenya's government, in the meantime, plans to spend about $9 million on fertilizer subsidies for the tea sector. Prices of that commodity over here went up to just over $3 a kilo. Output in Q3, however, was down about 9% to just over 54 million kilograms of tea. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how players in Zimbabwe's real estate sector have adapted to the slowdown created by the COVID pandemic.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Let's head over to Tunisia. The country is hosting the Arab Cybersecurity Forum in Tunis. The Arab Cybersecurity Vision White Paper is expected to be rolled out over there in accordance with the decision of the Arab Economic and Social Development Forum. Here's Adnan Chachi with that story.
The Secretary General of the Arab ICT Organization and senior Arab League officials, as well as ministers and ambassadors, attended the forum in Tunis. Participants hailed China's role in supporting Arab states and governments in developing a safe and efficient cybersecurity strategy.
We are happy to organize today with many partners the first Arab Cybersecurity Forum, and this forum will be an occasion to launch the Arab strategic vision in the cybersecurity sector. Many partners are with us, some of them are Chinese, and we appreciate a lot their contribution.
The digital economy, e-governments and the huge amount of information circulating require efficient cybersecurity systems and protocols. That's why the Arab League thanks its partners in China. We thank Huawei Global. We had previously inked an agreement with the Chinese government on cybersecurity, and this is part of the strong ties and cooperation between the League of Arab States and China.
Huawei's senior officials noted that the Chinese tech giant is supporting cybersecurity knowledge sharing in the Arab region and the world.
The cybersecurity is the trust capital to let this digital economy grow up. And today we had a lot of participation from different Arabic countries at high level, minister level, ambassador level. So it was really very nice to have this exchange of ideas and have alignment about the strategy to be taken between the countries about this kind of topic. And again, cybersecurity is really the foundation of the digital transformation in the future.
The Chinese ambassador to Tunisia declared that the authorities in Beijing and Arab states aim to boost their cooperation in cybersecurity and the technological field in general.
China and the League of Arab States have signed an initiative on data security. Arab states are the first countries in the world to sign this initiative with China. We are hopeful to continue tightening this world with Arab states to guarantee security in the cyberspace.
According to the Arab ICT Organization, the COVID-19 pandemic has created an extraordinary worldwide health, economic and social crisis.
The forced transition to online services for many countries, both ready and unready, has shown a major cybersecurity threat in the Arab region and the world. Experts say Huawei and all Arab states can work together to face these challenges by setting up a common and shared strategic vision. Adnan Chawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Players in Zimbabwe's real estate sector are reconfiguring their traditional operating models in order to meet the demands of their changing client profiles. They've also been compelled to change as they look to grow their way out of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
COVID-19 restrictions that kept workers at home and closed shops and offices dented property values as owners tried to accommodate tenants whose cash flows were disrupted.
When you have low demand of space, it means to retain occupancies, you may have to reduce your rent hours. So the reduction in rent hours versus a static cost of development, what it really means is your property values are now, they've gone down.
The residential market was not affected as much because players developed new models, including leasing out serviced stands as opposed to selling them outright.
Let's say buying a house, stand in their home is 100%. 40% of that value is usually going towards the purchase of the land. Now we are telling you, don't buy the land, lease the land, build your dream home, come and live in a dream home and continue paying rental towards that stand.
Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, Harare Central Business District was experiencing a drop in occupancy as many formal businesses fled congestion and some closed down.
All 5 floors of this building used to be occupied by an upmarket department store. It has since been replaced by hundreds of informal traders.
Such businesses are crucial for the survival of property owners who have millions of dollars in capital tied in these high-rise buildings.
Those little 10, 20 square meter, even a cubicle where somebody can bring their cell phones or their chargers or what have you, and if that's what they're selling, that's what they're selling. And you've got to meet the market where it is. Real estate is ever dynamic and must meet the needs of those people who are there versus those who used to be there or those who might come.
Some long-held practices may have to be revisited.
The traditional mentality of looking at leasing is to have a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year lease agreement. But with this kind of briefcase business, people, they want flexibility. They want to come and lease for one day.
It's estimated that more than 80% of Zimbabwe's labor force is engaged in informal economic activities. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
One last story for you that's, well, of an interesting nature, shall we say. A local eatery in Egypt is awarding a $63 voucher to anyone who can walk in, sit down and finish a 1 kilogram burger. It's dubbed the Four Seasons competition. The burger is topped with a fairly hefty amount of melted cheese and it's garnished with 4 different kinds of condiments. But the brave few who've signed up to take part will be served with something about the size of a cake, prepared with gloves, what promises to be a messy but very interesting experience. Initially, it was a marketing campaign for the launch of the newest burger, and the competition apparently became so popular that the restaurant said, you know what, let's keep this going.
We designed this competition for people who can really eat, for whoever thinks they can finish this burger by themselves. A lot of people joined in the competition when we first announced it. And today you can see there are only 5 contestants left to see who can finish the entire burger by themselves.
I honestly thought it was impossible for anyone to finish it. When I was eating it, I said to myself, this can definitely feed up to 4 people, and maybe even 3 people can finish it if they know how to eat.
From food challenges, let's run into the currencies as we wrap up the hour. Focus on Zambia's currency, the kwacha. It's had a very strong run of gains in Q3, but it's given up some of those gains since then. Since the start of Q4, actually, it's lost about 1.5% of its value against the American dollar. Ethiopia was downgraded yesterday by Moody's down to CAA2 with a negative outlook, but its currency, the birr, actually posted gains today, at least in the formal market. We don't have a clear picture of what's happening on the parallel one at the moment. It was 1.4% higher in today's trading session, 46.54. For the crypto lovers among you, spot Bitcoin rate down 2.5% today, just over $61,000. That's a run through your headlines and, of course, your currencies. And that's it for this edition of Global Business. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. Many ways to get your feedback back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang, the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. Well, today's up next from Washington, D.C.